Hello, students. This is Professor Schrader. I'm following up on my MLA formatting guide to present a brief explanation of quoting and citing in MLA. I know dealing with quotations, citations, and especially the works cited page can be frustrating, but I'll try to make it as clear and simple as possible to help you with documenting your sources properly in MLA format for any assignment in any class that requires you to use this format. Some of the basics of MLA formatting are covered in my video MLA formatting guide, which if you haven't seen, you might want to check out. In general, throughout the essay, you're expected to quote the titles of short pieces, articles, poems, episode titles, anything that's a short part of a longer whole, and italicize longer pieces like books, newspapers, magazines, movies, TV shows, podcasts, etc. Quote and cite all material from your sources, including paraphrase, and cite by author's last name and page number, if applicable. If there is no author, cite by the title of the article. The rule is, whatever comes first in the works cited page, which we'll look at in more detail later. MLA stands for Modern Language Association, which was founded in the 1880s by a group of educators and scholars for the purposes of standardizing and sharing knowledge among fields related to the arts and humanities. See that? It's a citation. The citation tells your professor, or whoever's reading your paper, where the information you're using came from. Citations are important in documenting your sources, and while it's not exactly important why they chose the format they did for the standard for arts and humanities, what is important to remember is that there is a standard, which means there's an expectation that your essay will follow the rules of MLA formatting. Just to clarify, quotes versus italics. Italics are used for books, magazines, newspapers, movies, anthologies, and journals, like The Wind in the Willows, Time, The Washington Post, Jaws, They Say, I Say, The Moves That Matter in Academic Writing, and Nature. In other words, titles of things that are whole things or compilations of shorter things. Quotes are used for the titles of articles, episodes, or poems, such as Is Google Making Us Stupid?, The One After Joey and Rachel Kiss, or The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. In other words, titles of things that are short sections or parts of a longer thing. And this is true throughout your essay, not just in the works cited page. First, you have to choose your source material. Obviously, that isn't something I can give you in this video. Depending on the class, assignment, and topic, you'll be expected to quote from a variety of different sources and document those sources accordingly. The question to ask yourself is, what makes a good source? There are several factors that go into choosing a good source, and this depends largely on the class you're taking, the assignment, and your time, because looking for sources can be time-consuming. For our purposes, we'll talk about some of the main sources you'll be drawing from for undergraduate writing, but keep in mind that this will vary depending on the requirements of your assignment. News sources are good to show the most up-to-date information, but they don't have time to be verified. They are good for eyewitness or first-person accounts, but they might be disproved by subsequent revelation. Periodical articles, like magazines, monthly publications, and collections, have the advantage of more time and research spent to verify the information. However, this might make the material no longer current or relevant by the time it comes out. Journals and scholarly articles are probably your best bet for reliable, authoritative information, but they take a long time due to the peer reviewing process. Finally, books and historical sources won't tell you what's current, but they will give you authoritative information, such as a reference book. Or they might tell you historical information, which can be useful for comparing what people used to think to what people think today. If I get enough likes on this video, I'll consider doing a more in-depth look into the kinds and usefulness of different source material. Peer review is a process that all academic papers have to go through in order to be published in a reputable journal or other scholarly publication. It involves the author's findings going through a critique by professionals in their field for accuracy. Why is this important? You want verified, relevant information, don't you? The pursuit of knowledge is the basis for a democratic society, and the citizen who values truth and empirical evidence can make the best decisions for their society. The propagation of false information, paraded as truth without verification or fact-checking, ultimately leads to the spread of falsehoods and the belief that opinion is more important than objective data. It's a problem that we all have to deal with on a daily basis. Your job as an informed member of society is to put that false information where it belongs. That's better. Now, where were we? Introducing and documenting outside material in your text is the main purpose of quoting and citing. But how should you incorporate outside material? One method that I've had success with is the quote sandwich. It works like this. Start by introducing your quote with a signal phrase, something that tells where the information is coming from and how you will use it. Try to incorporate the quote into your sentence and/or give some background. A simple way of doing this is, the author writes, but you will need to develop your vocabulary of signal phrases to avoid repetition and lazy writing, all part of becoming a better writer. Next, give the quote word for word, making sure that you use quotation marks to indicate all words that are not your own. You can use ellipses or brackets to remove unnecessary wording or change word forms or pronouns, but you cannot alter the meaning of the text. Finally, analyze the quote. Do not rephrase or restate the quote. Explain what the quote means and why it's significant to your argument. This is the part that I cannot do for you. It depends on the thesis you're arguing, the article you're using, the assignment you're completing, and many other factors. It is up to you to explain the quote in the context of your argument, and it is a step that a lot of students fail to do. They introduce it, quote and cite it, and go on with their essay without explaining why they chose that quote and how it proves their point. This is an unfortunate mistake because the analysis of the quote is where a lot of your argument comes out. It's not enough to say, I did some research, here's what somebody else says about it. You have to put it in context of your own argument, and that's going to change depending on what your argument is. No two writers are going to look at a quote the same way, and it is your analysis that shows your thinking. Next, we're going to talk about some tools that help you alter the quote. You can use ellipses, brackets, and SIC, or spelling is correct, to omit some words, change forms of words, or indicate that the source text is correct. Ellipses, the 3 dots, are not made by pushing the period button 3 times, unless you're using Word, which automatically formats 3 dots as ellipses. But in Apple computers at least, by pressing Option and the colon button. They are used to indicate that you are omitting words from the source material because they would be unnecessary, redundant, or would create a long, awkward quote. You cannot use them to change the meaning of the source material. Brackets, the square parentheses, are used to indicate that you are changing the form of a word, such as a name to a pronoun or the form of a verb, in order to make it fit the rest of the sentence. Like ellipses, they cannot be used to alter the meaning of the quote. Last, quoting is so specific that if a source material you're using has a spelling mistake, you copy the mistake and then write SIC in parentheses, meaning spelling is correct. This indicates to your professor that the mistake is in the source material, not on you. If you're using a source that has a spelling mistake, however, you might want to make sure that it is a reliable source. In addition to quoting from outside sources, you'll want to make sure that it flows with your text. One way to do this is to start with a paraphrase in your own words and finish with the quoted text in a way that makes sense grammatically. But this is an advanced technique. Give this video a like, and I'll make a more comprehensive video about quoting techniques. Now that you've gathered your source material in quotes, you need to cite the material with an in-text citation. You can think of citations as hyperlinks on a website. If you see blue underlined clickable text, it will take you to another site that contains that information. Similarly, in-text citations connect the cited text to the works cited page for reference. The rule for in-text citations is, whatever comes first in the works cited page goes either in the signal phrase leading up to the quote or in the citation. If there are page numbers, they go in the citation. Usually, the first element in the works cited page is the author's last name or the title of an article with no clear or specific author. For multiple authors, cite both authors' names for 2 and the first author's name and abbreviation et al., Latin for and others, for 4 or more authors. That citation came from a book called The Little Seagull Handbook, a guide to formatting. Every student who is serious about writing in college should invest in a guide, and as we'll discuss, there are many resources available for free online as well. Some common issues with in-text citation are with the formatting. The format of a quote in text consists of a signal phrase, the quote itself, and the citation. Make sure you end the signal phrase with a comma to introduce the quote. Put a space between the comma and open quotations. No space between the quotation marks and the start of the quote, nor between the end of the quote and the close quotations. Space after the close quotations, then your citation, and finally the punctuation, a period or comma after the citation. Now you might be telling me, but Professor Schrader, my professor says you put the punctuation inside the quote instead of after the citation. to which I respond your professor is wrong. However, I will take a moment to say that every professor has their own way of doing this, and although MLA is a standard, there are variations on that standard. Some professors will tell you to put the punctuation on the inside, some will tell you to put the citation only at the end of the sentence. It is your job as a student to familiarize yourself with the instructions of your professor. It indicates that you are paying attention in class and aware of the professor's individual standards, whether they put their punctuation inside the quotes or do it the correct way. Moving on. For a more in-depth explanation of the in-text citation, let's look at some examples of quotes and citations. If the author is not mentioned in the signal phrase, put the author's last name or names and the page number. According to Learning to be Gendered, quote, initial sex attribution is far more than just a simple observation of a physical characteristic. Eckert and McConnell-Janae, 16-17. Notice that there is no comma between the author's names and the page number. That is a convention of APA formatting and not used in MLA formatting. If the author or authors are mentioned in the signal phrase, just put the page number. Eckert and McConnell-Janae state, quote, sex determination sets the stage for a lifelong process of gendering. Page 16. If the author is not mentioned and there is no page number, as with most web sources, only the author's name goes in the citation. According to Salon.com, quote, far more than their male colleagues, evaluation of their work is inseparable from evaluation of them as acceptable women. Zeisler. Last, if the author is mentioned in the signal phrase and there is no page number, there is no citation. Andy Zeisler observes, quote, often women take legitimate criticism well because we're so used to having all that other stuff dragged into it that it's a relief when it isn't. And another note, look for page numbers in articles originally published in journals. When you're looking at articles online, either in a PDF or on a web page, it can be easy to forget that they have original pagination. Most web sources do not have page numbers, and you don't need to put them in the citation. Most articles that were originally published in journals do have page numbers, and you do have to include them in the citation. But what if there's no author? Well, I'm glad you asked. For some internet sources, and rarely for other sources, there will be no clear author. In this case, use the title of the source you are using. As a rule, always cite whatever comes first in your works cited page. If you're using a source that has no author, that should be the title. There are other formats for citing non-traditional sources, such as films, podcasts, etc. Each has its own considerations. Consult a handbook or website, such as OWL Purdue Online. If you're not sure, contact your professor or visit your college's writing center. Here's an example of a Wikipedia article for the Black Lives Matter movement. In the Works Cited page, you start with the title of the article, Black Lives Matter, so in the text, the quote would look like this. Some of the protesters actively distinguish themselves from the older generation of black leadership by their aversion to middle-class traditions such as church involvement, Democratic Party loyalty, and respectability politics. Notice that you put the title of the article in quotation marks, not Wikipedia, and not the URL. Don't ever put a URL in the citation. Also, you'll notice that I used ellipses here to remove material from the source text that would have been unnecessary. Block quotes are a special condition that is used for quoting more than 4 lines of text. They have a specific format which is a little different from the usual quote format. While the text here is not important, it is just an example of how to format block quotes. Notice that there are no quotation marks for a block quote. All the text is indented 1 tab, as if starting a new paragraph. This is accomplished by indenting the second line of your block quote, which should automatically make the rest of the quoted text snap to the same margin. If not, you'll have to adjust your word processor's margins on your own. There is the citation, which contains the same information as any in-text citation, and after the block quote, the text resumes along the regular margin, since you're not going to end your paragraph with a block quote, right? Deciding whether or not to use a block quote is another matter, and I've developed a flowchart to guide your process. Since we can paraphrase or shorten the quote using ellipses, it is often unnecessary to use a block quote except in specific situations where it is appropriate to quote more than 4 lines of text. Now we're getting to everyone's favorite part, the Works Cited page. On a separate page, list every source used in your document in alphabetical order by the first element. Start your Works Cited page on a new page automatically by using Insert and Page Break in your word processor. See my MLA formatting video for more info. The words works cited for only one or works cited for multiple works are centered at the top of the page. the first element of the works cited entry should be the author's last name or title of a work with no author. In the unlikely event that you cite a source that starts with a number, it goes before the alphabetical sources. The, a, and an, as the first words in a citation, don't count alphabetically. Alphabetize them by the following word. Now let's look at the elements of the works cited entries. For an article in an anthology, like They Say, I Say, which is an anthology I used for a freshman composition in the past, the works cited is as follows. Author's name, last name, comma, first name, the title of the article in quotation marks, the title of the anthology in italics, the edition of the anthology, if applicable, the publisher, the year, and the letters PP followed by the pages of the article. For an article from a database originally published in a journal or a book, the works cited entry is similar. Here we see an example of two authors. So the first is last name, comma, first name, and the second is first name, last name, followed by the title of the article, in this case the chapter of the book titled Learning to be Gendered, in quotation marks. In italics, we see the title of the book this was originally published in, Language and Gender. Next, similar to books, you will include the place of publication and the publisher. If you cannot find this information or it does not apply, leave it out. Finally, the year and the pages. For a print source, that is a book, the same rules apply. I'm using The Chosen not only because it's one of my favorite books, but to illustrate the elements of the citation. Author's name, title in italics because it's a whole book, the city of publication, the publisher, and the date. And if you can't locate any of that information, it can usually be found on the inside cover or first pages of the book. This is a point to let you know that part of your job as a student is to be a kind of detective and learn where to find this information. If you can't, your first instinct shouldn't be to give up and simply ignore the standards of formatting, but ask for help. Your professor should be glad to help you, or point to resources in your college that can. Last, we have an example of a works cited entry for a free web source. It follows a lot of the same patterns, but remember, some of these elements might not apply to these sources. A lot of web sources don't have dates listed, many don't have a clear or specific author, and the rule in MLA citation is to leave out those elements that you do not have. This article by Sherry Turkle is called Can You Hear Me Now? And was published on the Forbes magazine website. A lot of websites are the same as the organization or publisher that owns them, so this might seem repetitive, but some are owned by other companies. Again, you have to be a kind of detective to learn where to find this information. And I'll take a moment here to explain that there are automatic citation tools out there, like EasyBib, and I'm fully aware of the service they provide. I've used it myself extensively throughout my undergraduate and graduate career. However, it is important to consider that sometimes those tools can make mistakes. Your responsibility is to ensure that the citations you're including in your work are correct. Finally, I'll restate something I talked about in more detail in my formatting guide. The entries in the works cited should have a hanging indent, which means the first line is flush with the left margin, and the second and subsequent lines are indented 1.27 centimeters, or 0.5 inches for barbarians, creating a neat distinction between entries. This is accomplished, on Word at least, by going to line spacing and selecting special indentation and hanging indent. Your works cited page, just like the rest of your document, should be double spaced. For more information about formatting, check out my video on MLA formatting here. Just like I ended my video on MLA formatting with a note on why it's important, I'll end this video with a bit about why citations and works cited matter. Most importantly, citations tell the reader where you got your information from, so the professor can easily find your information and verify that the information is accurate and reliable. Moreover, it can help other readers find out more information about your topic. Oftentimes, as students, we don't think of our own work as scholarly, but it is. And just like your works cited page is a collection of material that you drew from to make your essay, the works cited pages of other articles can help you find related material. Last but not least, a well-documented and formatted essay shows that you're paying attention to the standards and requirements of your class and discipline, and it looks academic and professional. Especially if you're writing for something like a scholarship or grant, you are expected to maintain a high standard of academic formatting. It might be the best essay ever written, but if it's not formatted correctly, the scholarship committee or grant organization will not consider it. And here you can see an example of my own sources I've cited in proper MLA format in putting together this video. So I hope you found this video informative, if not downright entertaining, and if you'd like me to cover other topics like evaluating sources, APA formatting, and more, let me know in the comments below. Give the video a like and subscribe. Thank you, and peace.